Hey, everybody. It is Monday, April 21st. You're listening to the Mo News Podcast. I'm Moshe Mununu.
And I am Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back.
Thank you, Moshe, and thank you and Sari for holding down the fort last week while I was enjoying some family time. Much appreciated.
I'm glad you had a good break. I hope everyone had a happy Easter yesterday as well.
Yes, hope everyone had a lovely holiday.
And the Jews are back to eating leavened bread. Lent is totally over for everybody. So everyone's back to their traditional diets now, as of today, for the most part.
And as for our news diet, no shortage of headlines. So let's get to it. Starting off with some international headlines, the U.S. and Iran resumed nuclear talks over the weekend, reporting constructive discussions, although there are still some sticking points remaining. And it comes as President Trump appears to be losing patience with Ukraine and Russia. He says he might just be done trying to broker a peace.
Yeah, remember, he wanted to do the whole deal in 24 hours. It's now been about 100 days. He is frustrated and saying, they only have a few days to show that they're serious.
Back in the U.S., the Supreme Court blocked new deportations under the Alien Enemies Act for now. We'll have the latest on the immigration front. And on Sunday, the Pope wished a happy Easter to big crowds at the Vatican after briefly meeting with U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance, as the Vatican has become critical of the Trump administration's agenda.
Yeah, we'll tell you about what each side said about the meeting.
And in some news we've been tracking out of Central America, an American citizen hijacked a small plane in Belize. We'll have more on that story. And some financial reporting. Tariffs are likely to make it even more expensive to have a baby. I wasn't aware it could be more expensive, Moshe.
Jill, we're trying to break down just category by category here as the tariffs go into effect, how it's going to impact various purchases.
Next, we'll tell you about the oldest serving U.S. astronaut who returned to Earth on his 70th birthday this weekend.
Some people don't retire, Jill. They just orbit Earth.
Speaking of astronauts, or of non-astronauts, the U.S. Transportation Secretary has a message for the 6 women who briefly flew into space last week. And finally, it is man versus machine as China shows off its first humanoid robots during a half marathon. Any guess who won, Moshe?
Jill, I cheated. I know who won the race. We'll tell you about at least one area where you don't have to be worried about the robots yet.
Oh, good to know, because I was assuming it was the robots. And as a runner, it made me a little bit sad.
Don't be sad. Wait for the story at the end of the podcast.
Plus, Moshe has on this day in history.
Why the capital of Italy is called Rome and not Rheims on this day in history.
Rheims just does not have the same ring to it, so I'm glad it's called Rome.
We're going to go back a couple millennia into today's On This Day in History.
All right, let's start with 2 top foreign policy priorities for the Trump administration, Iran and Ukraine, and the state of trying to end one war and prevent another. Starting with the new Trump diplomatic initiative to strike a deal with Iran, the U.S. and Iran held a second round of nuclear talks in Rome this weekend. The goal is to come to an agreement that will prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. President Trump's top envoy, Steve Witkoff, leading the meeting of both direct and indirect talks. They lasted about 4 hours on Saturday. Both sides called the talks constructive. Iran's foreign minister said after the meeting that progress was made on lining up principles and objectives of a potential deal, and that technical level discussions will start in the coming days. At the heart of the negotiations is that the United States wants a deal that would ensure the total elimination of Iran's uranium enrichment program, which would prevent them from creating nuclear weapons. Iranian officials insist they are not enriching uranium in order to make a nuclear weapon, but to continue to produce peaceful nuclear energy. Although intelligence from a number of countries, as well as International Atomic Energy Agency leaders, believe that Iran has been enriching uranium to a level that would put them weeks or months away from a nuclear weapon. Iran has made a number of demands. They say they will absolutely not agree to fully dismantle their basic nuclear infrastructure. They are insisting the U.S. lift sanctions imposed on the country and stop threatening to attack them. President Trump has said his first choice would be diplomatic negotiations, but that if Iran does not cooperate, he will have to strike militarily. Some background here, President Obama struck a deal during his second term to allow Iran to keep their civilian nuclear program, and have third-party inspectors ensure that Iran did not build weapons. Trump, in his first term, pulled out of that nuclear deal because he thought it was too weak and that it gave Iran too many concessions. He now vows that any deal that he would sign in his second term would be much stronger than the one that Obama signed.
Yeah, it's worth noting, though, that the deal the U.S. is pursuing right now, or at least the deal that Iran demands, looks a lot like that Obama 2015 deal. Iran has said they have a red line. They don't want to talk about their missile program. They don't want to talk about their support for proxy terror groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. They don't want to dismantle their overall nuclear program. They're just going to talk about specific restrictions on enriching uranium. If you enrich it to a certain level, you get enough to have a nuclear power plant. If you enrich it to a much higher level, you have enough to build a bomb. And that's always been the big issue here. And that was essentially the package that Obama signed with the Iranians. And in exchange, he opened up billions of dollars. He took down some sanctions. And then Trump came into office in 2017. He's like, no, this is a terrible deal. And he ripped it up. And so then Biden tried to come back with a deal, couldn't make a deal with them. And now we're back to Trump too. And so now he says he's going to make a much better deal. But again, Iran claims they have the strength. It's funny reading their state media. They're like, the Iranian military has brought America to these talks, when in fact, they're at their weakest point in decades when you look at it, objectively speaking. But ultimately here, they're making similar demands to the deal they made with Obama. And the big question will be, will Trump, for the sake of a deal, agree to those terms, or will he, in fact, take into account their support for Hezbollah, their missile program, all these things that he took issue with 7 years ago when he pulled out of that initial deal? Now, Trump has made it clear he prefers diplomacy here, and there is a section of his cabinet, J.D. Vance and others, who are much more isolationist and are like, listen, we don't want to be involved in wars. We strike deals around the world. That's our preferred path. Then you have sort of more hawkish element of the cabinet, Marco Rubio, Waltz, the national security advisor, and others who tend to lean more into the Israeli perspective on this, which is Iran's at a weak point. Take them out now. And by take them out, I mean take out the civilian nuclear program and basically set them back a number of years, because the Israelis, for the most part, will, through covert means and recently through overt means, be able to push them back a couple months. They'll take out a top scientist. They'll blow something up randomly. But that really only postpones the deal. And what they've been looking at, the Israeli side, is a much more significant campaign and military strike. Now, remember, I was in D.C. a couple of weeks ago when Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, was in town. And I had heard that one of the things he was bringing up was a potential strike that he wanted American assistance for. Well, we learned late last week from the New York Times, through leaks from the administration, what appears to be the administration, that that's in fact what it was, confirmation of that he was presenting to Donald Trump a plan to launch an attack on Iran in May that would involve bombing as well as landing commandos on the ground to really put significant damage in the Iranian nuclear program. It appears, based on the New York Times reporting, and Trump effectively confirmed on Friday, that he's like, well, I'm going to wave that off for now. For now, he said, because I want to try diplomacy here. Now, what's interesting about the fact that it was leaked to the New York Times, Jill, is that effectively messes up Israel's plan to potentially do it anyway in May. And so the question is, who within the White House, who within the Trump administration decided to leak this to the New York Times? It wasn't just any leak that Israel was planning a strike there. It was very specific. It talked about the commandos. It talked about the timing in May, effectively giving Iran now a heads up that Israel was planning something. So was that effectively the White House leaking that to the New York Times to prevent Israel from going rogue and messing up this attempt that they have for talks here? One of the reasons the Israelis came to the Americans, by the way, is that while they can launch a strike, what they really need is special weaponry from the U.S. Apparently, the U.S., according to the report, has a 30,000-pound bomb that could go so deep into the ground and really take out a lot of what they're building right now in Iran. So it appears right now that they're serious about the talks. That's effectively what Trump said on Friday. And again, he was asked about this leak. And typically, if you disagree with the leak, especially in the New York Times, he would say, fake news. He would go on his whole shtick about it. He didn't do that. He's like, wait, what do you guys hear? Oh, yeah, no, I didn't totally wave it off. I partially waved it off. Effectively acknowledging that leaked report was totally legit.
And one of the things to mention in terms of timing for Israel is that Israel sees this as a very opportune time to attack Iran, because previously, we're talking pre-October 7th, Had Israel decided to go after Iran's nuclear capabilities, Iran would have unleashed all of their proxy forces in the region, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen. They have another Hezbollah group in Iraq.
Yeah, like poor man's Hezbollah. They got like a sub Hezbollah in Iraq. Yeah.
But in the past few months, as part of this war post the attacks on Israel on October 7th, Israel has really dismantled a lot of these groups or seriously weakened them. So they do see this as a huge opportunity, not to mention for the first time, we saw direct strikes between Iran and Israel. And in one of them, Israel did take out some of those radar stations and detectors. So this would have been, from Israel's perspective, an opportune time to take out some of those nuclear weapons facilities.
Yeah, they see Iran as the weakest it's been in 30 years, very vulnerable right now. And we're hoping, especially, Trump in the first term assassinated Soleimani, the top Iranian general. So Netanyahu, believes this, Trump is like-minded and this is an opportunity to take them out. But Trump very much wants to try to make deals. We saw it in the first term with Kim Jong-un. We see it with Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. We see it with the Iranians here, especially as increasingly the Republican party has this isolationist, warlike bent that you're seeing again from the sort of JD Vance side of the party. And so, really interesting, kind of watching the machinations here, watching these negotiations, and seeing if the deal that Steve Witkoff and the Trump administration can actually strike here is in fact different from the deal that they very much criticized that Obama struck 10 years ago.
All right, now to another foreign policy priority for President Trump. After promising a deal to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office and then kicking off weeks of negotiations, President Trump said Friday that he was about ready to give up. He hasn't set a deadline or said whether he would take any further action beyond walking away. But here is Secretary of State Marco Rubio late last week.
So we came here yesterday to sort of begin to talk about more specific outlines of what it might take to end the war, to try to figure out very soon, and I'm talking about a matter of days, not a matter of weeks, whether or not this is a war that can be ended. If it can, we're prepared to do whatever we can to facilitate that and make sure that it happens, that it ends in a durable and just way. If it's not possible, if we're so far apart that this is not going to happen, then I think the president's probably at a point where he's going to say, well, we're done.
So that was Rubio on the road explaining the president's position, saying, we pretty much had it with these two. They really have to show that they're serious here, or we're done, trying to mediate this.
Several European diplomats say that they feel Rubio's comments were mostly aimed at the Ukrainians and not the Russians, interestingly.
Yeah, it's been interesting to watch the social media posts because at times Trump is very critical of Putin, at times very critical of Zelensky, as, again, they've been trying to arbitrate here. Over the weekend, we should note, Vladimir Putin called for effectively about a 30-hour ceasefire starting on Saturday night through the Easter holiday. But in the first couple hours of that, launched several hundred attacks on Ukraine. So Zelensky said, this is nonsense. This is not a real ceasefire, and challenged him. And this may be a response to Rubio, too, saying, you know what, Russia, let's see your true intentions. I want not a 30-hour ceasefire. I want a 30-day ceasefire. Let's give peace a chance here. We haven't heard a serious response from the Russians as to whether they agree to that. But the Russians see an opportunity here. They see Ukraine weak, and they see an opportunity to take even more land here ahead of talks. So they've been slow walking here. The proposal for 30-day ceasefire, the deals that the Americans have called for here, they have a number of conditions for any peace agreement because, of course, they feel that it has advantaged them right now. And the longer that talks happen and they don't have to stop shooting, they can keep taking more land because the more they take, the more they believe they will get to keep in a final agreement. Nonetheless, Trump frustrated with both sides here. About 100 days in, no one should be surprised that ending a 3-year war is going to take a while, especially with someone like Putin, especially with the Ukrainians not willing to have to give up, a portion of their country here to the invading forces. So, we shall see if this was just a negotiating tactic by Rubio and Trump over the weekend, or if they're actually serious about being done with this. But, it could be like, oh, guys, I'm walking away from you two, and hoping that will then incentivize them to actually, be willing to make a deal here.
Like when I try to get my kids out the door. Okay, guys, I'm going to go without you. If you want...
you
We're
joke,
leaving.
Joe. You joke, but honestly, diplomacy is not that far off from dealing, especially if you're mediating a conflict, it's not that far off from dealing with children. You have two kids, one hit the other one. And you're like, okay, who hit who first? Well, they did that. Well, okay. So how are we going to come to a long-term solution? How do you understand that, like, your sister didn't like that, but your brother didn't like that? I mean, that is honestly, again, kidding. It's obviously this is a terrible tragedy, war, etc. But mediating these conflicts and coming to a resolution, again, sometimes it's just the basics. There was a joke. I did a courses in diplomacy for my master's program, and they said, like, one of the things we want you to read is everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, because like that, there's a part of that plays a role here, no matter what global conflict you're dealing with, and no matter how many centuries it's been evolving. You know, we're talking about the Middle East here in that case, but for the most part, sometimes it's very basic here, and that's one of the reasons why, like, who is Trump put in charge here? Steve Witkoff. Steve Witkoff, does he have any experience in diplomacy? No, he's a real estate developer, right? And now suddenly he's the guy in charge of dealing with Israel, Hamas, dealing with Russia and Ukraine, also dealing with the Iranians. And as far as Trump is concerned, negotiations are negotiations, and he thinks Witkoff has negotiated great deals on the real estate side, and for him, conflict resolution is real estate, right? It's a piece of Ukraine, it's a piece of Gaza, it's a piece of that. And so as far as he's concerned, let the guy who negotiates good real estate deals have a shot at diplomacy, because there's some overlapping strengths that you could have there.
All right, the U.S. Supreme Court on Saturday temporarily barred the Trump administration from deporting a group of about 30 Venezuelan migrants that it accused of being gang members. The U.S. government was trying to use that 1798 Alien Enemies Act, which is meant to be used during war. The Supreme Court issued the decision after lawyers for the American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU, asked it to intervene on an emergency basis, saying that dozens of Venezuelan migrants faced imminent deportation without the judicial review the justices previously ordered. The vote appears to be 7-2, with only 2 dissents. The court did not make a final decision, but effectively hit pause on the case and on the government plans for now. The administration is asking the Supreme Court to reverse the decision. The ACLU said several migrants at an immigration detention center in North Texas had received written notices of removal over the past several days. And a second group, not clear how many were in this group, was told to get ready for travel on Friday. Copies of those notices were only in English, and they did say the recipient would be deported. Aside from saying that the recipient can make a phone call, the notices do not inform those who receive them when they will be deported, that they are entitled to contest their removal, or outline the ways that they can do that.
So Trump administration officials have maintained that they only need to provide, as far as they're concerned, 24 hours notice to targeted individuals, and they're not required to instruct them how to contest deportations or provide them with things in Spanish, anything, as far as they're concerned. Now, the ACLU and others have argued, no, you need to do more to ensure that they know how they have a chance to see a judge after being informed they're being deported, so they can actually get their due process here. Notably, NBC has footage from Friday night in Texas of the detainees actually headed to the airport, and then the buses turn around. We don't have details yet from DHS or ICE as to why they turned around, but literally the turnaround happened before the Supreme Court ruled, but while a court case was proceeding, a lower court case on this matter. And if you recall what happened last month when they used the Alien Enemies Act to deport folks, they did it during the hearing. And so then when the judge ruled that they couldn't actually deport them to turn around the planes, they're like, our bad, the planes are already in the air and they're across the border. It appears at least somebody in the administration decided not to go and try that this time. Nonetheless, the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said, we're confident that we will ultimately prevail against what she calls the onslaught of meritless litigation brought by radical activists who care more about the rights of these terrorist aliens than those of the American people. And that's a lot of what you've been hearing from the White House and the Justice Department, is even when they admit in court, or forced to admit in court, they may have not followed by the letter of the law here, they are, effectively litigating this in the court of public opinion, you could say. Now, the Supreme Court has ruled that even with the Alien Enemies Act, that all deportees or potential deportees do deserve due process. A reminder, when it comes to the Constitution, they don't talk about citizens in the Constitution, they talk about persons, as in all people here in the U.S. So even if you're here on a visa, even if you're here on a green card, even if you're here illegally, we still afford you due process. Now, the Supreme Court halt that we began this story with, saying, you know what, stop all deportations right now. It was a 7-2 vote. The two most conservative justices, Alito and Thomas, dissented, and they wrote objecting to granting what they say is unprecedented and legally questionable relief without giving the lower courts a chance to rule. So effectively, they said that the Supreme Court went too far here in freezing the deportations. They should have let things roll among the lower courts and not jump in. But clearly, the other 7 justices, 3 liberals and 4 other conservatives, felt, some of the things we're seeing happen right now, we need to freeze all of this until there's more time to figure out the legality of all of this. Because again, once these people are out of American hands, sitting potentially in a prison in El Salvador, it is very hard for U.S. judges to then rule on these matters. They're changing the reality once they cross the border and deport them to some of these places. So the Trump administration asked over the weekend for the Supreme Court to roll back its decision. That's something we're going to watch this week. And again, so that's 7-2 to freeze things temporarily. And that's on top of the 9-0 Supreme Court ruling that said the Trump administration has the authority to deport migrants under the Alien Enemies Act, but they must provide them an opportunity to contest their removals. It's the nature of that contesting. How much do they afford them? Do they have to give them time? Do they have to give them help or not? Is a big question. And it comes as there's been another ruling in the Abrego Garcia case, a reminder. They've told the government to facilitate his release. Now there's a fight happening over what facilitate means. And now you've had a U.S. appellate court late last week say, no, facilitate means actively bringing him home. Jill, the Abrego Garcia case really dominated some of the political shows over the weekend.
Yeah, Maryland's Senator Chris Van Hollen was on a media circuit this weekend. He actually went to El Salvador to meet with Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who is one of the men, as you mentioned, deported by the Trump administration last month. He was sent to El Salvador despite an immigration court order back in 2019 that prevented his deportation to the country because of threats that he faces there. While the Justice Department has admitted that they mistakenly deported him, they have refused to work to get him back to the U.S. They say that Abrego Garcia is a member of the MS-13 gang. On ABC News on Sunday, Senator Van Hollen said that his trip was not necessarily to defend the man himself, but to defend the Constitution. Take a listen.
I am not defending the man. I'm defending the rights of this man to due process. And the Trump administration has admitted in court that he was wrongfully detained and wrongfully deported. My mission and my purpose is to make sure that we uphold the rule of law, because if we take it away from him, we do jeopardize it for everybody else. And I do want to point out, Carl, yes, the Trump administration is trying to change the story. They're trying to detract attention. Here's where they should put their facts. They should put it before the court. They should put up or shut up in court.
The White House was defiant in a social media post Friday, saying that Abrego Garcia is, quote, never coming back. The Supreme Court decided unanimously 9-0 that the government needs to facilitate Abrego Garcia's release because of the error. The case will likely go back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, this case goes round and round here. And the White House, the administration is adamant that they have no intention of bringing him back. They will not ask El Salvador to bring him back. And even then, Joe, we should remind folks that a court did find that he is deportable, just not to El Salvador, at least not back in 2019, due to the fact that he was facing gang threats and his family was facing gang threats down there. And you can read about that in some of the court documents that came out in 2019. Now, nonetheless, it was very interesting hearing Tom Homan, the border czar, on this in recent days, where he's like, the reality has changed on the ground in El Salvador. Bukele's in, he's arrested so many people there. It's gone from one of the most dangerous places in the world to the safest place in Central America. And so the questioning, it was interesting in a Caitlin Collins CNN interview. She's like, so why not then pursue it legally? Go to a judge and say, the things have changed on the ground there. We can deport him back to El Salvador. He sort of skirted around things saying, I'm not a lawyer, but I feel we're following the law here. So, I think that's the frustrating thing I think you hear from some conservatives even, is that there was a procedure here. There was a way to do this. He is deportable to a third country, just not according to the 2019 ruling to El Salvador. But it's interesting, the White House has dug its heels in here. They've dug up, accusations against him, including the accusations his wife made against him in terms of domestic violence, which came out last week. She, of course, says now they've resolved this privately. She wants him back home. And again, you shouldn't be deported to a foreign mega prison if you commit domestic violence, as far as the law is concerned. Nonetheless, you have a case here where Democrats feel they're in the right here, that they're fighting for due process, that if the Trump administration can send people to foreign prisoners without due process who are here illegally, that's a slippery slope here over time if they don't draw a line in the sand. At the same time, you have the administration who loves this fight because as far as they're concerned, they say this is Democrats caring more about people who are here illegally, who might be MS-13 gang members, than they do about you. And so there's similarities to the campaign when they said they care more about trans rights than people like you. And so in this case, the White House is eating this up. They love the image of Van Hollen sitting outside, looking sympathetic towards Abrego Garcia. And we have since
with
learned
margaritas.
So now Van Hollen says that they were drinking water, and Bukele's people, the El Salvador's presidential people, kept putting drinks in front of them, and they randomly midway through the meeting put salt-rimmed drinks that looked like they were half drunk in front of them. And so he says that was all basically an attempt by Bukele to make it propaganda. In fact, he says that Bukele and the Salvadorians wanted the meeting to happen in front of a pool, and that Van Hollen was like, absolutely not. So there was an optics war being played there. But even then, because of how partisan things are, people who tend to believe the Democrats here will believe the Democrats. People who tend to agree with the administration are going to agree with the administration. But it's a fight that both sides want to have, and both see an advantage to having. That's where things stand as we're a couple of weeks into the saga.
Moshe, I was watching NBC Meet the Press this weekend where Senator Van Hollen was also on, and they did play a clip from a different one of his constituents who is a mom whose daughter was killed by an illegal immigrant. And she was speaking directly to him saying, why do you seem to care a lot more about somebody who is in this country illegally, who has, in her words, a long rap sheet, compared to my family or my daughter? And what about her? And his answer was, I care about both. This isn't an either or type of thing.
By the way, that was the mom that the White House brought to the press room last week to address the media. So Caroline Leavitt had her. She met with the president last week. They tried to make that point. And Democrats saying, well, we care about all of the above. And this is whataboutism. What about this? What about that? But this is the argument that, again, why the White House likes this case is because, they're like, well, you seem to only care about the border, mostly when it's a guy who was here illegally, was sent abroad. And again, the argument you hear from Democrats is like, no, it's that we care about the rule of law.
Time for the speed read from CNN. Pope Francis gave his traditional Easter blessing on Sunday at St. Peter's Basilica, his highest profile appearance after he spent more than a month in the hospital for double pneumonia earlier this year. The 88-year-old is still recovering from his respiratory illness. He is unable to speak for long periods of time. So he made some brief appearances during this Holy Week, but on Easter Sunday, he was able to offer a special blessing that only the Pope can give, which offers a pardon for sins. An aide read his address, which appealed for an end to the conflicts around the world, particularly the war in Gaza. He said, quote, I appeal to the warring parties, call a ceasefire, release the hostages, and come to the aid of a starving people that aspires to a future of peace. The Pope then greeted crowds in St. Peter's Square from his Pope-mobile, the first time he has done that since being hospitalized. Before his Easter blessing, the Pope had a very brief meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, who is a devout Catholic. He converted to Catholicism back in 2019. The meeting was officially to exchange Easter greetings.
So that was the brief meeting on Sunday. On Saturday, he met with a number of senior Vatican officials, including effectively the Pope's deputy, to discuss, among other things, according to the Vatican, their views of the U.S. policies on things like migration, deportation, prisoners. And it comes as the Pope and the Vatican have been particularly critical of, the previous Trump administration, but also this Trump administration. Before he was hospitalized in mid-February, the Pope blasted Trump's deportation plans, saying they would deprive migrants of their inherent dignity. And what's interesting is J.D. Vance has actually tried to use a Catholic concept, the concept of order of love, order of charity, to justify their immigration approach. And for the Vatican, they feel that they've reversed it. So you had the Vatican Secretary of State, effectively, it sounds like tonally, be very critical or admonish him. But what's very interesting is that if you look at the statement from the Vice President's office, and you look at the statement from the Vatican, very different. The statement from the Vice President's office was, we shared our religious faith. We discussed the plight of persecuted Christians around the world, and President Trump's commitment to restoring world peace. The Vatican's report referred to an exchange of opinions, including over migrants, prisoners, refugees, and current conflicts. So the Vatican does have a policy of diplomatic neutrality here, but has been pretty critical here. So it's always interesting to see how each side comments about a meeting, and this is one of those cases.
From NBC News, a scary situation in the air over the Central American country of Belize last week. An American man hijacked a small plane in Belize on Thursday, stabbing 2 passengers and a pilot before one of the stabbed passengers fatally shot him. The plane then managed to land safely in a small town in Belize. The Tropic airplane was carrying 14 passengers and 2 crew members and was flying from Corozal, a small town near Belize's border with Mexico, heading to the popular tourist destination of San Pedro when it was hijacked. The plane circled in random directions for nearly 2 hours as the drama unfolded in the air.
Yeah, so the police commissioner of Belize commented over the weekend. He identified the hijacker as a Kenula Taylor, said he was a U.S. military veteran. Still waiting more details about the identity of the American attacker there. His motive is still unknown, though apparently, according to reports, he was demanding to be flown to Mexico at one point and then flown to the U.S. at another point. Now, as far as what happened here, he stabbed a number of people, and then apparently one of the stabbed passengers happened to be armed. He was licensed to carry a firearm, so he was able to then shoot Taylor on the flight, allowing them to land when they did. As of their fate, Taylor, the hijacker, is dead. The 2 passengers stabbed out of the hospital. The pilot remains in the hospital as of Sunday night, recovering.
From the Associated Press, tariffs ranging from 10% for imports from most countries to 145% for imports from China will likely make raising a child a lot more expensive, especially for new parents. In the first year alone, it costs an average of about $21,000 to raise a child, but tariffs are set to make that number go even higher. An estimated 90% of the core baby products and parts that go into making baby items, from bottles and diaper pails to strollers and car seats, are made in Asia. The vast majority come from China. This is according to the Juvenile Products Manufacturers Association, which is a U.S. trade group. They say they asked the Trump administration for a tariff exemption, arguing that baby products are essential for children's well-being.
Trump exempted some baby products, including car seats and high chairs, from import taxes during his first term, but he hasn't said whether he would consider doing it again. You know, we did see the headline last weekend that he did carve out electronics and iPhones and other items from the tariffs for now, though he's looking at a separate electronics tariff. So will there be other carve-outs here, especially for an issue like baby products when so many of them are made in China and Asia? Production over time, over the course of the last few decades, like we've seen in other industries, has increasingly moved out there. And we were talking to a couple companies over the weekend and stores that buy baby products, and they say that even when they look within the U.S., there's not enough tool makers, manufacturing expertise, automation, skilled labor, cheap enough labor to really be making the thousands of products that they need in the baby industry. So that's where things stand right now. It's something we'll watch. Staying with the cost of things here on another trade front, watch out for tomato prices. This isn't specific to tariffs here, but this is specific to an agreement that the U.S. has had with Mexico for a while that looks like it's going to be expiring here. As of July, new fees will hit fresh tomatoes imported from Mexico. Why is that significant? About 70% of our tomatoes come from Mexico. And so officials in Mexico hope they can renegotiate a deal here. The accusation from the American side, from the Trump administration, Commerce Department, is that Mexico is artificially dumping cheap tomatoes here and hurting domestic tomato producers. Now, even when you equal things out, there is an issue because the climate in Mexico is better for tomatoes and labor costs are cheaper. So even without any artificial changes there by the Mexican government dumping accusations, they're like, listen, tomatoes from here are going to just be cheaper anyway. Now, this has evolved over time. Back in the 90s, when our agreement was signed to allow in more tomatoes from Mexico, about 80% of tomatoes here in the U.S. were made in America, or grown in America, I should say. And now it's down to 30% over time. So the argument here, and this is when we get into like specific tariffs and trade agreements, it's industry by industry. The tomato industry has very much been hurt by this deal. So we'll see what happens. If this deal elapses and we don't renew it, look for the price of tomatoes to go up at some point this summer.
From the BBC, the country's oldest serving astronaut has made a return to Earth just in time for his 70th birthday. Don Pettit landed in Kazakhstan with his Russian crewmates at 6:20 a.m. local time on Sunday, which happened to be his birthday.
Happy birthday, Don.
The crew spent 220 days on board the International Space Station. They orbited the Earth more than 3,500 times, according to NASA. It was Pettit's fourth mission, marking nearly 600 days in space. Although he is America's oldest serving astronaut, meaning he's alive right now, he is actually not the oldest person in space ever. That record belongs to John Glenn, who flew on a NASA mission in 1998 when he was 77 years old. Glenn died in 2016. So Pettit will now spend some time readjusting to gravity before coming back to the United States, to Texas.
Yeah, John Glenn, legendary astronaut, actually flew in the early 60s into space back in 1962, then flew again in 1998, was a U.S. senator. But Pettit, if you think you know some active 70-year-olds, he's an astronaut going around and around. Not clear whether he'll be returning after this, but still an incredible career for Don Pettit. Speaking of astronauts, Jill, this is the story we covered last week that continues to have headlines surrounding it. This is the Blue Origin trip last week that included a crew of 6 women, including Katy Perry, Gayle King, Lauren Sanchez, and several others. Well, the Secretary of Transportation chimed in recent days about the claims that those 6 are astronauts. Several in interviews have referred to themselves, or they've been referred to as astronauts. And Secretary of Transportation Sean Duffy wanted to make clear in a post on Twitter that they should not be calling themselves astronauts. He wrote, in part, "The crew who flew to space this week on an automated flight by Blue Origin were brave and glam, but you cannot identify as an astronaut. They do not meet FAA astronaut criteria." So to meet FAA astronaut criteria, you need to have flown at least 50 miles above Earth and perform duties essential to public or human spaceflight safety. NASA also defines an astronaut as someone who has made star sailing their profession. You can look at dictionary definitions as well. A reminder, the Blue Origin flight was approximately 11 minutes, 3 minutes of which they spent in space, and it was fully automated in terms of it went up and then went down. But some have taken offense at the fact that people are calling it a ride. Here's a bit of Gayle King in one of the interviews she did after the flight last week.
I don't like that people are calling it a ride. A ride, you never see a male astronaut who's going up in space and they said, oh, he took a ride. We actually duplicated the route that Alan Shepard did. That's why it's called, this particular capsule is called the New Shepard. We duplicated that route. No one said he took that ride. Yeah. It's always referred to as a flight or a journey. So I feel that that's a little disrespectful to what the mission was and what the work that Blue Origin does. And then my question is, have y'all been to space? Have you been to space? Go to space or go to Blue Origin and see what they do and how they do, and then come back and say, this is a terrible thing.
So you have Gayle, my friend, on the defense there, and I think some people are taking issue with her response saying, you know what, you go to space, you go to Blue Origin, and then you let me know what you think. Many people saying, well, listen, I don't have several $100,000 to go into space.
So, Moshe, I don't think this even is as much about them doing this space mission. You and I talked about it last week. We thought it was actually kind of cool. But it's kind of just acknowledging what it was, which was PR for Blue Origin. And it was a pretty cool thing. And it got people excited about space. You don't need to come back and pretend that you're an astronaut and you did all the hard things. It's we're not taking anything away from them, but that's what appears to be the pushback here.
Jill, I think one of the issues with this whole thing is there are so many people who have spent their careers studying space who would, get a lot out of going to space because they devoted their careers to it. They're scientists, they want to be astronauts. And I think one of the issues is that, like, you're putting Katy Perry in the air and, she is like holding up a butterfly with her set list for her concert. And so is there a better use of those seats, those very expensive seats on those trips? And so clearly Blue Origin, trying to get buzz here. And so that's why they selected the people that they did for the trip. And I think, for those who are like, well, if science is really your objective here, there were probably different people that could have been chosen for this trip. And so I think one of the things is like, no umbrage, Blue Origin can choose however they want. People can go up there. Don't sell it more than what it is.
Exactly. So it's Gail being so offended that they're calling it a ride. It
Yeah.
was a ride.
It was a ride.
And
It was
that's
an 11-minute
okay.
ride.
It's okay. It's
It
cool.
was a risky ride. Like, it's, it's like definitely like, scarier than something at Six Flags. But
I don't know if I would do it. I mean, kudos to her for doing it, and
Yeah.
kudos for all of them.
no, it
for
takes a
having
lot
the
of courage.
training and doing
It's super
it,
cool. But again, don't make it more than it is.
Yeah, you're not astronauts. It is a ride.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay.
Literally, it's space tourism. They call it space tourism. That's what Blue Origin is.
Okay, and finally from the Wall Street Journal, we're often worried that robots are going to continue to replace us in a number of ways, but there is one area where it appears we are okay, at least for now. In a race of man versus machine in China over the weekend, man has come out on top. Beijing held a half marathon over the weekend. It featured thousands of human runners and then 21 Chinese humanoid robot models. It was meant to showcase China's cutting-edge technology in humanoids, an area that is at the forefront of the U.S.-China tech rivalry. China's goal is to surpass the U.S. and Japan and become a world leader in humanoid robots within 2 years. Many robotics companies and research labs brought the 21 robots to the starting line, although only 6 could finish the race. And while the human champion finished the race in 1 hour, 2 minutes, and 36 seconds, it took the first robot 2 hours, 40 minutes, and 42 seconds to complete the race. That is nearly triple the time that it took the human. Score one for humanity.
Yeah, no worries on your next half marathon there, Jill. You're not going to lose to the robot, at least not yet.
And no coincidence, I happen to be wearing one of my New York City Marathon shirts today.
Yes, for folks who don't know, Jill has run the New York Marathon, the full marathon, multiple times, and the robots couldn't even get through the half. So at a time when there's heightened concern about AI and robotics taking over human spaces, many spaces, at least in terms of the physical, literally humanoid robots that, sort of walk like us, and in this case, run like us, or I guess given their speed, jog like us, we don't have to worry about them yet, though the robot winner of the 6 of the 21 that actually finished the race, Tien Kung Ultra, is the one who finished in 2 hours and 40 minutes there in the half marathon. Jill, we put up some footage over on Instagram of some who didn't quite make it that far. One quit halfway, one ran into a fence, broke into a few pieces. The humanoid robot's still working on their running ability. But there's a serious goal behind this, which is China says they want to be the world leader in humanoid robots within the next couple of years. Japan has had an advantage. The U.S. has been really good at robotics. So the Chinese government's actually got involved here in terms of investing in this. And this is one of the reasons why they made this part of the half marathon in Beijing. And so you might see next time on your trip to China, or if you Google on YouTube, you have humanoid robots in China performing bike rides, roundhouse kicks, flips. And so they're really trying to get into the humanoid robot thing.
All I could say is that if I was running next to one of these things, I'm just watching a video as we speak, I think I would find it to be so annoying because running is so difficult, especially these long distances, that you really use the other runners that are in the crowd to help lift you up. And it's kind of this camaraderie. So
Yeah.
if you look over and there's just like a robot next to you.
You're just like, yeah, there's nothing. You're just like, you're not sweating.
Thirsty?
You're not thirsty. You can run in any conditions. But no worries. We're not quite at Westworld. If you ever saw that show on HBO, we're not quite there yet. All right, we'll end here with On This Day in History. As always, we're gonna go back like 2,700 years, Jill, to tradition states that April 21st, the year 753 BC, Romulus and his twin brother Remus found Rome on this day. They were orphaned infants, according to legend, were taken in by a she-wolf, and that's how they were raised effectively. They would go on to found a town on the site where they were saved as infants, but then they had a quarrel. And so Romulus, legend has it, killed his brother Remus, which is the answer to my question at the top, why it's called Rome and not Rheims. Well, Romulus killed Remus, so then naturally the city will be called Rome.
Okay, it's all coming together.
Let's fast forward a couple millennia to the year 1836 on this day. If you're a Texan, you probably know this day. It's the day that effectively you beat the Mexicans to have independence. Texas was once a part of Mexico, then becomes an independent state after a surprise attack against forces of the Mexican general. Texas had declared independence from Mexico. Mexico tried to subdue them. Texas defeats them in a major battle on this day in history. And so then Texas would become their own country for a few years there, nearly a decade, until they become part of the United States in 1845. Jill, fun fact for the rest of you, Six Flags, it's called Six Flags because Texas has been under Six Flags through its history. It was once part of Spain, then France, then Mexico, then independent as a Republic of Texas, then the United States, and then briefly as a Confederate State of America. Six Flags. Next time you go to Six Flags, you're like, oh, do you know why it's called Six Flags? Well, because Texas has had Six Flags.
All right, kids, you paying attention? The next time you go to the amusement park.
Yeah, they're like, Mosh, like literally it's the last thing I'm thinking about at Six Flags is like Texas history, but whatever. You have it now. On this day in 1962, the Space Needle in Seattle was officially opened and commemorated at the start of the World's Fair on this day in Seattle. A lot of major iconic buildings built for World's Fairs, Jill. I think they still have World's Fairs. They're not quite what they used to be. But like we just recently discussed, the Eiffel Tower was open for the World's Fair in Paris. The White City in Chicago for the Club and Exposition, the World's Fair in Chicago. And on this day in history, the Space Needle in Seattle.
It's kind of like the Olympics now, where cities, you get the Olympic bid, and all of a sudden you start to build all of your infrastructure and new stadiums. And
yeah, or it was that way. I feel like the world's like, have you been to it? I haven't. If the World's Fair is still happening, anybody, we haven't heard about it. They're doing a terrible job promoting it. But I think we should bring it back. I like the idea of a World's Fair.
Mosh, I agree. It's like the Olympics for nerdier people like us.
Yeah, just like, cool innovation happening. It's like the Consumer Electronics Show.
It's
but
like
global.
CES kind of,
Yeah,
right?
It's like Consumer Electronics Show, but like global innovation and a city like debut stuff. But I guess we're not into it anymore. Or if they're doing it, nobody knows about it. I had a couple iconic Nintendo things on this day in history. On this day in 1984, Duck Hunt was released. Those of us of a certain generation remember Duck Hunt, shooting the gun at the TV screen, trying to get those ducks. And then on this day in 1989, the Game Boy was released for the first time, the first handheld video gaming console. What does that make it today? 36 years old, the Game Boy today.
All right, everyone, that is a wrap on this Monday. Thank you for listening to the Mo News podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends, please. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And review us kindly in the App Store. Seriously, those reviews really do help.
And a reminder that Mo News Premium right now, we have our annual sale going on for at least one more week. You can get 20% off membership. Both new members as well as existing members can get 20% off their renewals. And we have a favor to you if you're a Mo News Premium member. We call you the Mo News team. We'd love for you to call in and leave us a message as to why being a premium member is important to you. Let us know why you're here and why people should sign up for Mo News Premium. We want to hear it from those of you who are happy being Mo News Premium members. You can call us. You can call us at 1-800-711-MOSH, M-O-S-H, 1-800-711-MOSH, or you can write in info@mo.news. We'll be featuring some of your messages on the upcoming episodes of this podcast, as well as over on Instagram. We appreciate your perspective, your willingness to help here. Again, as we go through our annual sale, we want to share with everyone the experience that you've had on Mo News Premium and why they should join. Again, call in, leave us a message, 1-800-711-MOSH, or write in an email, info@mo.news.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to the Mo News podcast. Have a fantastic day. I hope you enjoyed.